For those of you charged with possession of fentanyl here in Florida, it is probably the most serious felony drug charge that they can come up with. And I would say most of you didn't realize that you were getting a possession of fentanyl. I would say it hits people sideways because most of the cases I'm defending on fentanyl, they thought they had cocaine. And it turns out it was laced with fentanyl. Or they thought, because fentanyl is cheap and a little bit goes a long way, so they cut it in the cocaine. And unfortunately, that is killing people too. I've had several clients, sad to say, pass on from overdose while I was representing them, and it was all fentanyl related, even though not one of my clients thought they were taking fentanyl. They thought they were taking something else. Cocaine, heroin. People will mix fentanyl in just about anything you can think of. I had one that was like oxycodone. It was fake oxycodone pills that were full of fentanyl, and it kills people, folks. That is why you are going to find that your possession of fentanyl case is more serious than you thought it was. And what also sucks is under Florida law, even though you didn't know you were possessing fentanyl, they can still get away with charging you with possession of fentanyl, even though you thought it was, and everybody thought it was something else. That sucks. There are some knowledge-based arguments to try to get around that. I mean, after all, the biggest deliverer of drugs is your mailman, and your mailman delivers drugs, but who knows? Does the mailman really know what's in that package? So do you charge the mailman if you can figure out that the mailman actually delivered drugs to somebody? No, knowledge is somewhat of an element, but it's a path we usually don't get anywhere with. But I think knowledge is important. The bottom line is on fentanyl cases, FDLE here in Orlando, they do all of Central Florida there, right by my office. You could walk there from here, but it's really hot right now, so I don't recommend that. And we get what we call the analyst jacket on a possession of fentanyl case. And the reason is these little graphs, right? Probably can't see them, but they test the fentanyl with gas chromatographs and mass spectrometers. Now, that is a fancy way of saying that the process to prove that you had fentanyl involves the lab over here taking a standard, what they think is fentanyl, and then taking what the cop gave them, which is the unknown, which is what the cop is alleging you and arrested you for, which is fentanyl. And they are comparing these two things. There have been problems with the lab in terms of their comparisons when it comes to fentanyl. And I won't bore you with many details, but I have a graph here where in one of my cases, they did the standard fentanyl test, and the standard was on May 21st of 2018. That standard against my unknown, my client's drugs, and claiming a match 5 years later, 6 years later, really? So there are protocols if you want to say that there is a match, and there's problems with the matches with FDLE because they're literally using different mass specs and gas chromatographs and then running the standard on there and then saying, oh yeah, my client's graph matched that graph on a different machine 5 years ago. And that is not scientifically valid necessarily. So my point is that I don't want to bore you with the chemistry, but fentanyl is a little more tricky than weed, okay? Just because the cop says, oh, this turned a certain color and it's fentanyl, and just because FDLE says, I think it's fentanyl, the graphs and the case analyst file sometimes will call them out, and it really wasn't the fentanyl that they thought it was. So you have to watch closely when you're defending a fentanyl case. You have to get the analyst case file to make sure that this is a real match, because they're not always matching, and it's not always a proper identification. Like you just get a lab report, oh yeah, this is fentanyl. They ID'd my substance that was in my car as fentanyl. I don't trust it. We've called them out before on this. And if you're going to hire an attorney on a possession of fentanyl, this is something that needs to be explored. So it kind of makes fentanyl a little more unique than just your standard weed charge and some of the other stuff that's more easily identified. That's what we have in Florida.